Most people think tithing is about money, but that's exactly why they miss it. Tithing has never been about God needing your finances. It's about you understanding his system. God is not emotional about money. He is mathematical. He operates by laws, and when you violate a law, the law doesn't punish you. It simply stops working for you. The tithe is the foundation of God's economic system, and any system without a foundation eventually collapses. You don't tithe to become rich, you tithe to bring order. And when order is established, provision is automatic. God does not bless chaos. He blesses alignment. If you want supernatural results, you must apply supernatural principles. Once you understand that tithing is not a religious rule, but a kingdom law, everything about money, provision, and overflow begins to make sense. Most people approach money hoping for miracles while ignoring laws, and that's where frustration begins. Hope is powerful, but hope without understanding is dangerous. You don't build a life on wishes, you build it on principles. God does not run his kingdom on luck, chance, or random blessings. He operates by laws, and the thing about a law is this: it works every time, regardless of who believes in it. You don't have to understand gravity for it to work. You don't have to like it for it to work. You only have to align with it. In the same way, God's economic system functions by laws, not emotions. Many people say, I'm praying for a financial breakthrough, but prayer is not a substitute for alignment. Prayer invites God into your situation, but obedience allows him to move freely within it. When you violate a law, the law doesn't get angry with you. It simply stops producing results for you. If you jump off a building, gravity doesn't punish you. It responds exactly as it was designed to. Financial struggle is often not the result of demonic attack or lack of faith. It's the result of violating spiritual laws while asking God for outcomes those laws were designed to produce. Here's what most people miss. God's laws are not designed to restrict you. They are designed to protect and provide for you. Laws create predictability, and predictability creates peace. When you understand that God's economy is structured, you stop guessing and start governing. You stop reacting emotionally to money and start responding intentionally. That's when stress leaves and stewardship begins. God is not impressed by need. He is not moved by panic. He responds to order. This is why tithing cannot be reduced to generosity or charity. It is not about being a good person or proving devotion. It is about acknowledging that there is a system already in place that works when honored. When you treat tithing as optional, you treat God's law as negotiable. And laws don't negotiate. They either function or they don't. The moment you understand this, you stop asking, will God bless me if I tithe? And start asking, what happens when I align with a law that already carries a blessing? You see, blessings are not rewards for effort. They are the natural outcomes of alignment. God doesn't bless hustle. He blesses order. That's why two people can pray the same prayers, read the same scriptures, and believe in the same God, yet experience completely different financial results. One is hoping for increase, and the other is operating by principle. One is emotional about money, and the other is disciplined. One is asking God to change circumstances, and the other is adjusting behavior to match the system. God's kingdom is not a democracy where opinions change outcomes. It is a kingdom governed by law. And in a kingdom, benefits flow to citizens who understand and honor its systems. When you begin to see money through this lens, frustration turns into clarity, confusion turns into confidence. You stop blaming the economy, the government, or your background, and you start taking responsibility for alignment. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. You don't need a financial miracle every month when you're living by financial laws. Laws create sustainable results. Miracles are temporary. Principles are permanent. God never intended for you to live from breakthrough to breakdown. He designed a system that, when followed, produces provision over time. Once you grasp that God operates by laws and not luck, you stop chasing money and start managing systems. You stop Stop asking God to bless what you're doing and start doing what God can bless. And when your finances come into order, heaven has permission to respond. Alignment activates supply. Most people assume tithing is about numbers, percentages, and whether 10% is still relevant. But the moment you reduce tithing to an amount, you miss the revelation behind it. God has never been impressed by figures. He is interested in order. Order is heaven's language. Wherever God rules, things are arranged properly, and wherever things are arranged properly, increase is inevitable. Tithing is not about how much you give, it's about who you put first. And whatever you put first governs everything that follows. The reason the tithe comes first is not because God needs priority, but because you need alignment. When the first portion is set apart, the rest is positioned correctly. That's how order works. In any system, what comes first determines the flow. If finances are handled last, randomly or emotionally, chaos is guaranteed. But when God is honored first, clarity replaces confusion. You're no longer guessing what to do with money. You're stewarding it according to design. This is why God never negotiates the order, even when people struggle. He doesn't say, pay your bills first, and if you have something left, honor me. He establishes the principle of first because first reveals trust. Anyone can give leftovers. Alignment is revealed by priority. When you give God what's first, you're declaring that He is your source, not your job, not your business, not your skill. And when the source is honored, the supply remains secure. Many people think tithing reduces what they have, but in reality it redeems what remains. Money without order leaks. You can earn more and still feel behind when there is no structure. That's because increase without alignment produces pressure, not peace. God is not trying to take from you. He is trying to protect what flows through you. The tithe is not subtraction, it's stabilization. This is why people who ignore order often live in cycles. They receive income, feel relief, spend emotionally, and then return to stress. Not because they are irresponsible, but because there is no governing principle. Order introduces governance. When God is first, money stops controlling you and you start controlling money. You move from reaction to intention. You stop spending based on feeling and start managing based on vision. Order also creates clarity about ownership. When the first portion is returned, everything else becomes stewardship instead of possession. You no longer ask, can I afford this? You ask, is this aligned? That question changes everything. Alignment prevents regret. It slows impulse. It brings wisdom into everyday decisions. That's why tithing is spiritual before it is financial. It trains the heart to submit to truth rather than pressure. God does not bless chaos. He blesses order. That's why He established patterns in creation. Seed time and harvest, day and night, first and follow. These patterns are not suggestions, they are systems. When you align with them, you don't have to force results. Provision flows naturally because you are no longer fighting the design. Some people say, I'll start tithing when I have more. But order doesn't follow increase. Increase follows order. Waiting to put God first is backwards thinking. If more money fixed disorder, wealthy people would never struggle. But abundance without alignment only magnifies dysfunction. God is not preparing you for more by giving you more. He's preparing you for more by teaching you order. When the tithe is returned first, peace becomes the indicator that the system is working. You may not always have excess, but you will have stability. You may not always see overflow immediately, but you will experience consistency. And consistency builds confidence. Confidence in the system allows you to plan, to grow, and to give beyond obligation. Once you understand that the tithe establishes order, you stop asking how much it costs and start recognizing what it creates. Order invites increase. Many people believe that need is what moves God, but need has never been the currency of heaven. If need were enough, the most desperate people would always experience the greatest provision. But desperation does not activate supply, alignment does. God does not respond to panic. He responds to obedience. Obedience is not emotional, and it's not reactive. Obedience is intentional alignment with what God already established to work. This is where many sincere people get confused. They pray harder when money gets tight. They fast when bills pile up. They ask God to come through when pressure increases. But pressure is not a signal for God to act. It's often a signal for us to examine whether we are aligned with His system. God's provision is not released because you need it. It's released because you obeyed what positioned you for it. Grace has already made provision available. Obedience determines access. Think about that. God is not creating provision in response to your situation. He already created the system that delivers it. When you obey, you don't convince God to bless you. You place yourself where the blessing can reach you. That's why obedience always precedes provision. Not because God is withholding, but because systems require participation. This is why emotional giving doesn't produce consistent results. Giving when you feel inspired but ignoring the structure leads to instability. God doesn't reward emotional moments. He honors faithful alignment. Obedience doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It doesn't wait until everything makes sense. Obedience acts based on truth, not circumstance. And when you obey in uncertainty, you activate certainty in the system. Many people confuse faith with hope. Hope says, I believe something will change. Faith says, I will act according to what is already true. Obedience is faith in motion. It is the evidence that you trust God's system more than your current reality. When you obey while it's uncomfortable, you are declaring that God's principles are more reliable than your perception. Provision always follows obedience because obedience puts you in rhythm with heaven. When you're out of rhythm, everything feels forced. When you're in rhythm, things begin to flow. That doesn't mean there will never be challenges, but it means challenges won't stop supply. You may face resistance, but you won't face abandonment. Obedience creates continuity. This is why God often asks for obedience before explanation. Explanation builds comfort. Obedience builds capacity. God is not trying to make you comfortable. He's trying to make you fruitful, and fruitfulness requires trust in the process. When you obey without seeing the full picture, you're expanding your capacity to receive what the picture contains. Some people say, I can't afford to obey right now. But inability is rarely financial. It's often mental. Obedience is not about affordability, it's about authority. Who has the final say over your decisions? Fear or faith? Pressure or principle? When obedience becomes conditional, it stops being obedience. And conditional obedience produces conditional results. God's system is designed so that obedience unlocks what effort alone cannot. You can work harder and still struggle if you're misaligned. You can earn more and still feel restricted if the system is ignored. But when obedience is present, even limited resources become sufficient. That's not magic. That's order functioning as designed. Provision is not God reacting to your situation. It's God responding to your alignment. Once you understand that, you stop begging and start building. You stop pleading for miracles and start practicing principles. And when obedience becomes your default, provision becomes predictable. Obedience positions you for supply. When people hear the word storehouse, they often think of a location, a building, or an institution, but the storehouse was never just a place. It was a system. God does everything through systems because systems create sustainability. Random giving creates moments. Systems create momentum. God's concern has always been flow, not sporadic effort. The storehouse exists so that there is a consistent structure through which provision moves, not just for one person, but for the entire ecosystem of the kingdom. A system removes guesswork. When a system is honored, you don't have to wonder where to bring your resources or how supply is maintained. God designed the storehouse to be the central point of distribution, ensuring that what comes in can go out effectively. That's why it's not optional in the design. When people bypass the system, they don't break the system. They remove themselves from its benefits. God never intended his work to be funded by emotional generosity alone. Emotion fluctuates, but systems endure. When giving becomes selective, inconsistent, or disconnected from structure, scarcity begins to show up in unexpected places. Not because God failed, but because the flow was interrupted. Systems depend on participation, and the storehouse works when people understand that consistency matters more than intensity. This is also why the storehouse is tied to accountability. Systems create responsibility on both sides. There is responsibility for those who bring resources and responsibility for those who steward them. God doesn't bless disorderly systems. He blesses systems that are aligned, transparent, and purpose-driven. When the storehouse functions properly, needs are met, vision advances, and growth becomes sustainable. Many people say, I give where I'm led, but leadership without structure eventually leads to confusion. God leads through principles as much as through promptings. Promptings guide moments. Principles govern life. When the storehouse is honored, leadership is no longer subjective. It's systemic. The system works regardless of mood, season, or circumstance. The beauty of a system is that it protects both the giver and the mission. It removes pressure from individuals to carry the burden alone. It prevents burnout and imbalance. When everyone participates according to design, no one is overwhelmed. That's how God created the body to function. Many parts, one flow, shared responsibility. When the storehouse is ignored, people often attempt to replace the system with personal generosity. But generosity without structure cannot sustain vision. It might inspire for a moment, but it cannot build over time. God's work was never meant to survive on occasional passion. It was designed to thrive through faithful systems. The storehouse also creates unity. A shared system produces shared ownership. When people are aligned in where and how resources flow, division decreases and trust increases. Confusion thrives where systems are unclear. Clarity thrives where structure is honored. That's why God's design is not fragmented, it's unified. Some people resist systems because they fear control, but God's systems are not about control, they are about coordination. Systems don't restrict movement, they direct it. When flow is directed, waste decreases and effectiveness increases. The storehouse doesn't limit generosity, it multiplies impact. When you honor the system, you're not just supporting a place, you're sustaining a purpose. You're participating in something bigger than personal preference. You're aligning with a design that ensures continuity, provision, and growth beyond individual effort. God never asked people to fund his work randomly. He designed a system that, when honored, guarantees supply where vision exists. Systems sustain supply. One of the biggest misunderstandings about tithing is the belief that it's an act of generosity. People say, I give my tithe, but that language alone reveals the confusion. You don't give what doesn't belong to you, you return it. And when that revelation settles in your spirit, everything changes. The tithe is not an offering you decide to be kind with. It is a portion already marked. God is not asking for something extra. He's establishing ownership. Ownership is the real issue behind tithing, not money. Whoever owns something has authority over it. When you keep what was never meant to be kept, you're unintentionally claiming ownership you were never designed to carry. And ownership comes with pressure. That's why money feels heavy for so many people. They're carrying responsibility that was never meant to rest on them. The tithe releases you from false ownership and places you back into stewardship. Stewardship is lighter than ownership. Owners worry about loss. Stewards focus on management. Owners stress about supply. Stewards trust the source. When you return the tithe, you are making a declaration, not with words, but with action, that God is the source of your increase. And when the source is acknowledged, the stream stays open. This is why tithing cannot be manipulated into a transaction. It's not, I give so I can get. That mindset keeps you trapped in scarcity thinking. The tithe is not a seed, it's a statement. It says, I recognize where this came from. Offerings are seeds, tithes are acknowledgments. When you confuse the two, you mismanage both. Many people struggle financially not because they lack income, but because they lack clarity of ownership. When everything is mine, fear increases. Fear causes hoarding. Hoarding disrupts flow. And whatever stops flowing eventually stagnates. God designed money to move, but it must move in the right order. Returning what is his first establishes that order. This is also why tithing reshapes your identity. You stop seeing yourself as a provider and start seeing yourself as a partner. Providers carry pressure, partners carry trust. God never asked you to supply your life. He asked you to steward it. When you take credit for provision, you also absorb blame for lack. But when you acknowledge God as the source, you free yourself from both pride and panic. Some people say, "But I worked hard for this." Yes, you worked, but you didn't create the ability, the opportunity, the strength, the ideas, or the favor that made the work productive. Effort without breath accomplishes nothing. The tithe reminds you that productivity is a partnership, not a solo performance. Returning the tithe also protects your heart. Money has a way of slowly shifting trust if it's not governed. What you hold tightly begins to hold you. The tithe breaks that grip. It trains your heart to release control regularly, so control never replaces faith. This is why tithing is spiritual discipline, not financial pressure. When you return what belongs to God, everything else becomes blessed for use. Not magically, but legally within the system. You're no longer asking God to bless what you kept. You're managing what he already authorized. That's a powerful shift. You move from hoping God approves your decisions to confidently stewarding within his design. Stewardship invites partnership, and partnership invites increase. Not because God owes you, but because the system works when ownership is acknowledged correctly. You were never meant to be the source. You were meant to be the channel. When ownership is settled, peace follows. Everything in God's kingdom responds to alignment. Heaven is not moved by noise, volume, or repetition. It responds to order. When things on earth come into alignment with what heaven has already established, results are released without strain. This is why alignment matters more than effort. You can work hard, pray long, and believe sincerely, but if things are out of order, friction is guaranteed. Heaven doesn't resist you, it waits for alignment. Alignment is simply agreement with how God designed things to work. When your finances are aligned with God's order, they stop fighting you. Provision doesn't have to be chased, it flows. And flow is always the result of alignment. Misalignment creates blockage. Alignment creates movement. This is not mystical, it's systematic. Many people want heaven's results without heaven's order. They want open doors without open hands. They want increase without instruction. But heaven responds to structure. God's blessings are not random drops from the sky. They move along established pathways. When those pathways are honored, supply reaches its destination. This is why alignment must happen on earth first. Heaven is already in order. God is not adjusting his system to match your situation. The adjustment is always on our side. When you align your actions with divine order, heaven doesn't need to be convinced. It simply responds. Just like electricity flows when a circuit is connected, provision flows when alignment is restored. When finances are misaligned, people experience resistance, income feels heavy, bills feel oppressive, decisions feel stressful. But when alignment is present, even responsibility feels lighter. The workload may not disappear, but the weight does. That's because alignment removes friction. You're no longer forcing outcomes. You're cooperating with design. This is also why alignment produces supernatural results that feel natural. When heaven responds, it doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like timing working in your favor. It looks like opportunities appearing at the right moment. It looks like resources lasting longer than logic says they should. That's not coincidence. That's alignment producing predictable outcomes. Many people expect heaven to respond emotionally, but heaven responds legally. God's system is lawful. When legal alignment is established, benefits are released. That's why heaven opening is not about God deciding to bless you. It's about you positioning yourself where blessing flows. Alignment doesn't beg, it qualifies. This is where peace becomes the confirmation. When alignment is right, peace shows up before provision does. Peace is not the result of having more, it's the result of being aligned. When peace enters your financial life, it's a sign that heaven has permission to respond. Anxiety fades because you're no longer violating the system. Alignment also creates consistency. You stop living in cycles of excitement and disappointment. You stop swinging between overflow and anxiety. Consistency replaces chaos because systems are now governing outcomes. Heaven responds steadily to steady alignment. When earth aligns, heaven responds, not occasionally, but predictably. That's how laws work. That's how systems function. That's how God designed his economy. You don't have to manipulate the system. You have to honor it. And when you do, heaven's response becomes inevitable. Alignment doesn't force God's hand. It opens the channel. Heaven responds to order.